Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Oystacher. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing at Five9 Software, and welcome to today's live webinar, 10 Tips for Hyper-V Security You'll Wish You Learned Sooner. And although you would wish that you learned these sooner, it's not too late. So I'm excited that everybody's here, and we'll be joined by Alex Karavanov, who's the Director of Solutions Engineering. And today we're going to talk about a couple different things. We're going to talk about some tips and best practices that we've discovered ourselves, we've learned from our customers and also our partners. We'll talk about the solution, how to solve for these tips, and then we'll give you a demonstration of how the Five9 Cloud Security Solution addresses these tips and best practices. And then at the end, we'll do some Q&A. So if you do have a question throughout the presentation at any time, feel free to ask it in the question panel on the GoToWebinar control console. We'll answer as many as we can towards the end. With that being said, I'm pleased to introduce Alex Karavanov, the Director of Solutions Engineering, who will take us away from here.
Thank you very much, Ryan, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our today's webinar. And without any further waiting, so we are going to jump into the tips right away. So the very first tip I would like to speak about for Hyper-V security and the definitely the best practice recommended by Microsoft, and hope most of you are aware about it, but it's really important to stress it at this stage. So the Windows Server environment actually supports running in two modes, as you know, right? So there is a full GUI mode and Windows Server Core mode. Also, Microsoft produced the free version of Microsoft Hyper-V Server that's called Microsoft Hyper-V Server. And this is a core version and a very stripped down version of the operating system that allows you to run the virtual machines. And the reason why Microsoft did that and why it's such an important tip and best practice is because the size of this installation and the attack surface of that. So imagine that full GUI version of Windows Server has so many different services that allow you to run your system, your infrastructure. But when you run the virtual machines, you don't really need all of them. So you only need the ones that are related to virtual machines operations. So that's why running Microsoft Hyper-V Server actually gives you all the required capabilities for virtual machines operations, but doesn't run any extra services on top of that that may be rudimentary. And when you don't have all of this, right, attack surface decreases, and therefore there are less of a chance, right? So for someone to attack the services that are not actually being used by you. So none of the security researchers are going to be able to find any vulnerabilities, right, or exploits to use on the system that actually doesn't have them. That's important, right? So that is very important, and definitely is one of the key recommendations, the very first ones that we usually give to our customers and everyone who is just starting with Hyper-V infrastructure. Also, because of the stripped down version of operating system, there is less of a chance of Windows update coming into your system, right? Obviously, when there is less of update frequency for your server, less reboots and less updates are actually required. And of course, you would still perform Windows updates on the servers, but because you don't have as many components anymore, only the ones that are related to the Hyper-V operations, you don't have to update that very frequently. So that's one of the key ones. The very first one, very simple to comply, but indeed very helpful. And if you are afraid about the stripped down interface of Windows Server Core or Microsoft Hyper-V Server, please know, so within the Windows Server environment, you actually can switch back and forth from core mode to full GUI mode very quickly. And for Microsoft Hyper-V Server Core, you can manage it remotely, or with one of our solutions, we could probably discuss that a little bit later. So nothing to be afraid of, great, very stable systems, and all components, security components can actually be applied on this stripped down core service as well.
And it seems like, Alex, this should be, the very first tip that you would implement.
Absolutely. That's why I would have it first on my list. Thank you, Ryan. So the second one is related to the way your virtual machines talk to each other. And in Hyper-V setup, there are several virtual networks that you can use. So these are internal, private, and external ones that allow your virtual machines to actually talk to external world, to World Wide Web. And majority of the solutions, right, that you intentionally implement, would protect your virtual machines from external bases, right? So they would protect virtual machines from incoming traffic from outside and from sending some malicious traffic from within the network, right? Or sending out some sensitive information to a restricted service. But within Hyper-V setup, you also need to pay attention to inter-virtual machines interactions. And these are usually happening on private and internal networks. And this actually saves you a lot of traffic. So because you don't really have to send traffic through certain external devices, virtual machines talk directly to each other. So it becomes very performance effective. This is indeed very easy to set up and configure. You can have as many private networks as you really need. I mean, just reasonably need. But controlling traffic and communications between these virtual machines on this kind of networks may be a challenge. So you need to pay attention to that. So don't let your virtual machines, different kind of service, talk freely on this kind of networks. You still have to be able to control that and prevent attacks happen internally. Because if you get hit by a certain threat, right, or there is a malicious user internally that would try to use VM jumping, right, so to get to another system that probably not that protected, so he would be able to do this. So you need to have a full control over these communications and protect against attacks between virtual machines on all types of virtual networks.
Yeah, and Alex, it seems that it's really common that customers and organizations are used to protecting from the outside in, but it seems like a lot of times people often, may miss the threat that occurs between virtual machines.
That's exactly the case. So, and unfortunately, we've seen this happening before when outside protection was really strong, right? But people didn't really account for those malicious internal users, insiders who could potentially have access to virtual machines, right? So if you go through threats lists and actually one of the toughest ones to control is considered to be insider threat. So that's something to note and something to definitely take care about your virtual machines as well.
Sure, yeah. Not only the threats from viruses, malware, whatnot, but just making sure that the malicious insider that might have access to one VM and possibly getting access to others.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so I think with this we can go to our next tip, and this is a tip about the agentless production. And the reason it's actually something I have in the third place here is related to the volume of virtual machines you would run. So, in general, right, so when you used to have physical service, security protection layers could easily run as agents on these machines. And at that time, we were using probably 10-15% of our physical hardware performance, right? So at this moment, virtual machines are being deployed literally in a few seconds, right? So you can deploy a virtual machine in a couple of minutes, definitely, and make it running. So the volume and density of virtual machines, is constantly increasing, and I can see customers' environments as well. So number of virtual machines being used gradually increases, from like say 10 virtual machines, 3 years ago to 20, 30, 40 virtual machines nowadays. So that definitely shows us that the Hyper-V is very, very stable, very robust system, right? So you can put actually pretty heavy workloads on that in complete production, sometimes even 200 virtual machines for VDI scenarios, right? But when you protect the systems, it's extremely important to account for performance that's being used by security solutions. So in legacy endpoint solutions that you need to push inside the virtual machine, for each system, for each security layer, right? So they would eat up this valuable performance, and the virtual machine density that becomes available for you, right? The performance available for you on the host level decreases as well. So that's important part. So when you use agentless protection, you get this performance back. You can actually increase density. So that's important from performance standpoint. But from a security standpoint, it's equally important because some users may have full access to a virtual machine, right? So you're probably restricting that a lot, right? So probably you would have different kinds of rollbacks-based access control implemented. Definitely depending on the type of organization you're in, right? So you may have that all role-based, right? So you may have mixed access to applications with certain roles. So depending on your current setup, but those users who have access to virtual machine would potentially be able to disable protection when it's agent-based, right? So it's much harder to control. It's much harder to make sure that all security configurations are still enforced, and it's harder to protect from malicious user because he has certain level of access to your system protection layers. So that's indeed important. So one part of that is performance, really big performance saving when you switch over to the agentless protection mode. And second part is obviously the security part of that. So when end users shouldn't really have access to your security layers implemented.
And it seems, Alex, that as people are putting more weight into their virtual environment, and you have these heavy applications, and they're using more and more data, across all different types of enterprises, finance, healthcare, that you really need to find those performance efficiencies wherever you can, because you certainly don't want your security solution taking the same resources as the business applications that help you, run your business.
Absolutely. So that's a very important consideration, and business applications are primary ones. This is why we use virtualization, all right. So this is why we use Hyper-V, and it actually very well connects to tip number 4 related to protecting the host itself, right, that runs the virtual machines. So the business applications are inside virtual machines, no doubt, right? So these are the key ones. So these are the ones that actually bring your business to life. So these are the ones that allow you to achieve your business goals. While Hyper-V basically does this worker role in backend, allowing you to run this and run them efficiently. So at this stage, right, so you can set up highly available infrastructures, right? So you can set up Hyper-V clusters, and if this is something that you haven't implemented yet, I would strongly recommend you to run your environment in a clustered mode, in a failover Hyper-V failover cluster mode. But even with that, it's still important to protect your host. Just please keep that in mind, right? So sometimes I see that virtual machines get protected, right? Hosts completely not. Sometimes opposite, hosts get protected, virtual machines are completely unprotected. So neither of these cases should really happen. So both virtual machines and hosts need protection. Of course, you would restrict access to your Hyper-V host from outside, so as much as you can. So probably you would allow certain updates to happen from Hyper-V hosts, maybe, right? So just one direction for a certain service. But other than that, you're very likely to restrict access to Hyper-V hosts from outside. And actually, as much you can restrict that, the more the better, right? So, ideal case, you have it completely isolated from access from anywhere else. But certain services may still require updates, right? So you may need to allow it through a secure proxy, for example, right? But just keep in mind that both virtual machines and hosts need to be protected, and perimeter firewall protection, for example, can do the job, right? So just for network protection layer, but also please keep an eye. So if you're able to apply certain dedicated firewall intrusion detection system, antivirus malware. So if you have the chance, please use that. The more protection layers you have for your hosts, the better. That definitely helps you ensure that virtual machines are going to continue running safely, even say if attack tries to hit them.
Yeah. So, in your experience, Alex, do you see that sometimes organizations are fail to protect the Hyper-V host, or is that something that's easily missed?
Sometimes it happens, and luckily, so when I see people using our first step, right, Windows Server Core and Microsoft Hyper-V Server, that's rarely the case, because they're already stripped down to reduce the attack surface, right? But sometimes, when it is Windows Server, full GUI version, and maybe certain extra applications running there, which definitely shouldn't, right? So I see that point being missed, right? So say, okay, we protect virtual machines. These are the ones that talk to outside world. We don't really protect our hosts anymore. So that shouldn't be the case. No, host is still very important, even though business applications are inside your system, virtual machines. All right, so with that, I think we're good to switch over to our tip number 5, and this is related to centralized management of all of your rules and security definitions, antivirus definitions. This is a pretty short one. I think everyone gets it, so it seems to be common sense, right? But I believe this is really important to reiterate it, because when you manage your protection inside the system, right? So of course you can do this per virtual machine, right? So that's doable. Maybe you would even use certain automation to do that. But it's too easy to miss one or another system, right? And the chain strength is always about its weakest link, right? So if you have, say, 200 virtual machines, you protected 199, but one virtual machine, is still running on all the definitions, and you get a virus hitting your system, right, or ransomware hitting your system. That's it, right? So you are exposed, and you definitely want to prevent that. So managing that per virtual machine is labor intensive, very hard to do, and even say if you run in a small environment, right? So if you run 10, 20 virtual machines, probably 30 virtual machines, central management is very, very highly recommended, right? So if you run 200, 600, 1,000 virtual machines, it's definitely in place. It's almost impossible to do that, right? Individually per system. But what I observe sometimes, right? So when you're just starting, for example, right? So you go and say, okay, I don't have that big of a density. I have 10, 20 virtual machines in place. It doesn't take too much time for me to actually go and update them all individually and check how to configure rules individually. This is just really something that you need to probably make yourself switch from, because once your environment grows, that's going to be harder to do. So it's much better to do this right, from the very start. And second part is, you may still miss one of your system's rules or definitions not being updated. So that's extremely important. Please keep in mind. So the earlier you can ensure centralized management, the better for your system.
Sure. And so, if you're a bank and you have a lot of branches, a lot of different sites, if you're a retail organization with a lot of different sites, a healthcare organization with a lot of different, hospitals and sites, you need, and you have a centralized IT organization, you need to find those efficiencies for centralizing these things, especially if you're trying to find efficiencies.
Absolutely. And this is one of the management frameworks. So for large organizations, and if you follow any of them, it's very likely to already have it in place, right? So probably 99% of these organizations are going to have that, right? But still, if you run outside of that, sad, please keep in mind that's still extremely important to maintain.
Right. And what's interesting about this is that not only are these tips great for security, but also for running security efficiently.
Exactly right, Ryan. Exactly right. All right, so with that, let's move over to our next step, which is about using multiple layers of security. And this is actually something that you may also consider common sense, but often you would also see that implemented in security standards. So security standards nowadays have a very comprehensive set of security layers that need to be applied to each system, right? So in previously these were used for physical environments, but some people, what I observe, right? So some people may consider that, okay, so as far as we have it for our host, it doesn't really matter whether we apply these layers onto the virtual machines because our hosts are protected, right? So that actually takes us back a couple tips on the host protection part. But when you go through audit security audit process, you would sense that, right? You really have to have the same security layers for your virtual machines as well. So this is a best practice from protection and from security standpoint. Also, it is a requirement, basically a requirement, if you have to comply to a certain security standard, right? So if you have common audit of your system in the nearest future, right? So the first one of them is obviously going to be antivirus, intrusion detection system, traffic monitoring, network protection, anomaly analysis. So you can find all these layers, described in security standards, and this is where you can actually ensure that you apply them to virtual machines as well. So the more layers of protection you have, detection you have, the more data you have about your system, so probably you would pass it over to your SIEM system for events and logs analysis, right? So security events management is definitely extremely important when you got a very large volume of events happening, but multiple layers of security allow you to reduce potential, successful attack happening. Really to just basically 100%, for example, probably even less. So the more layers of security apply, the better. Sometimes you would see as a recommendation have several layers of firewall protection even, right? That's true. So it does help overall. If one system, just is not being efficient enough, right? So second one actually prevents that. If you have some malicious internal users, that also the case. I should say that inside the virtual environment, antivirus is something that is taken for granted, right? So, but say intrusion detection is what you need to pay attention to as well. So, even though you would definitely make sure that you have sensors on perimeter of your network, just keep in mind so that's equally important for virtual machines as well, and virtual machine to virtual machines interactions.
Yeah, it's like these different layers are almost insurance policies. If something does slip through the cracks, at least there's multiple ways that an organization could catch and remediate an issue. Especially as security threats evolve over time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So the next part here. So obviously, when you want to start protecting your Hyper-V hosts and virtual machines, you need to ensure that you set up appropriate antivirus exclusion. So, now imagine, right? So, and if you ever tried running an antivirus on Hyper-V server without these exclusions, you would face the virtual machines potentially being damaged. So, that's indeed this is actually system stability tip, but also security tip, obviously. So you need to ensure that you either use the hypervisor based and hypervisor aware antivirus to do this, or you follow the Microsoft recommendations, and you would actually find the link for that as well for recommended antivirus exclusions for Hyper-V hosts. Please don't forget it. It's indeed extremely important to exclude this because this this is something that can directly impact your virtual machines, right? So it's very important to run antivirus. You need to ensure that your system is protected, but without exclusions, that may be dangerous for your production workloads, and production workloads is actually what we care about, right? So that's an extremely important tip. Don't forget about it. It's something you need to configure, or you need to implement a solution that actually has it pre-populated available for you to use out of the box.
And I just want to note that we will be sending the slide decks after today's presentation, and there's a hyperlink to the recommended antivirus exclusions for Hyper-V hosts from Microsoft. So that'll be a resource to all of you audience members.
Thanks, Ryan. Yes. Okay. So other than that, so you would need to make sure that you secure all guest virtual machines, right? So that actually something that you would do all the time, right? A primary reason here is if you forget to protect one of your systems, if you intentionally decide not to protect it, right, it becomes this kind of a honeypot, unless of course it's a real honeypot, right, that attackers may be able to use. So if you protect some of your virtual machines, you obviously you take care of them, right, but remaining ones may cause issues internally. So when you deploy a virtual machine, make sure it's protected. So it's much better to automatically enable protection for every newly deployed virtual machine. So this is something that allows you to ensure that, okay, even if you deploy a new system, from a template, for example, right, in a couple of minutes, it's up and running, but it's also protected. If you're deploying a new virtual machine that's going to be public facing, actually any virtual machine, make sure that you have the latest security updates in place as well. That's something I see people miss sometimes. So say just deploying a virtual machine out of a template, just installing the security updates where next update cycle. But actually, that's really important to either maintain the update status of your virtual machine templates, or make sure that the virtual machine gets all of them right away before it jumps into production system. So integration components, of course, these are the ones that allow virtual machine to interact with the hypervisor, so they get updated as well. With Windows Server 2016, it becomes much easier, right? But still keep in mind, so this need to be updated. So, important takeaway from here. So even if you say, if you deploy virtual machines, and you're planning to use them in a little while, just make sure that they're still protected. Don't let them, stay in unprotected mode without a latest security updates applied. Okay, so with that, just something that connects with that really well. So tip number 9 is about isolating the idle virtual machine. So sometimes, and this is what I observe a lot, so you would go and deploy a virtual machine for testing purposes, right? So you would just go in and say, okay, I just want to deploy this very nice service, a new nice product, and just want to test it inside my system. And what we see a lot happening is these virtual machines, get and use default passwords for this kind of services. They may be unprotected, but they may still sit on certain production networks because they're testing production-like services. So when you deploy a virtual machine for testing purposes, so the best practice is definitely you just deploy it, you test it, you protect it, test it, then you just demolish, you shut it down, or completely remove it unless you're really planning to use it, right? In case there is a real need for the virtual machine to stay in your environment, without using any production workloads, obviously, right? Make sure to isolate it. So, the big mistake I see happening sometimes, so is when new service gets deployed, users soon once again default passwords may be exposed to the internet. So very likely, right? So the service that is being used, application is being used, may be vulnerable to automatic kind of attacks. Then the system gets compromised, and because it's on the same network, not being as isolated, it can get inside other production workloads, affect other production systems. So this is what you definitely want to avoid. If there is an idle virtual machine you don't really need anymore, the safest way to do this is just shut it down. If you still want to keep it running for testing purposes, make sure it is isolated from your production workloads. There are a few ways to do this, so please choose the best one that fits your needs, but don't forget about them.
And Alex, at least for my benefit, what's the best way to find idle VMs in your environment? Is it a monitoring thing? Could you mention that for a minute?
Sure. So idle virtual machines, are usually right. So they may be deployed by different users, right? Especially if you allow certain virtual machine provision capabilities inside your system. So there are a few ways to analyze statistics for the systems. Sometimes they would show very low traffic consumption, right? If you're just administering the system and you know that your users may keep them running. But once again, my key recommendation here and takeaway: just protect every virtual machine, just 100% of the virtual machines that get deployed, and then have the idle virtual machine policy. So either just automatically just delete all virtual machines that are not being used, and never been logged on or start for a week. That may be a little bit hard, right? Because you may have certain service running without anyone logging in, so that only, of course, affects VDI kind of service. So for VDI machines, there is a best practice of deploying virtual machines, in the morning, and obviously shutting them all down, deleting them all in the end of the day. But so if you want to do this via monitoring, you can do this via traffic monitoring. But of course, just either you would use a certain naming convention for test service to quickly spot them, or make sure to go through their performance, once again, their resources consumption parameters. All right. So, and tip number 10. So this is going to be the final one for today here. So
I'm kind of sad about that too, Alex, because these tips have been pretty good, and now that we're coming to the end of it, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself.
No, don't worry. You'll start implementing them. But say this is what we want everyone to start doing after today's session. So what we want to make sure here as well. So when you protect the virtual machines, obviously network protection can be done via certain physical devices, right? And you surely want to use a third-party firewall outside of Windows firewall capabilities. And there are a few reasons for that. So when we see a Windows firewall being used for virtual machines protection, unfortunately, it's very labor intensive to manage, right? So when you manage Windows Firewall, you have to go inside the virtual machine, make sure it's actually enabled, make sure that actually rules are populated correctly. So a certain part of that can be done via GPO, but we still see GPOs not being nested correctly, rates are not being applied to systems correctly. Also, you are limited to certain services that you can use there. And one of the key limitations that we also observe, obviously, it's not able to protect any of your Linux virtual machines, right? So if you have any Linux virtual machines, Windows Firewall is not applicable. But even without that, Windows Firewall, it's the one that usually used, right? So for user protection, just some very base level. But even if you want to stick with that, if you want to continue using that, I would still recommend you to have something outside of that as well, to make sure that systems are really protected. Because once again, there is a high chance to either user tampering its configuration, or someone getting through system just know they're using Windows Firewall because it never got updated from the GPO. So make sure that you use third-party firewall protection. Once again, the very, very base level of Windows Firewall can be fine, but if you're talking about production systems, you need to have something from outside. You need to make sure that all of your virtual machines, all types of guest systems are protected.
And that makes a lot of sense because you were just talking about in your earlier tips about these multiple layers of protection and, whether you're going to use the native Windows firewall and then you're going to add to that, that's just kind of further strengthening your Hyper-V environment.
Exactly, exactly. And that's key. That's really important to maintain. All right, so with that, I just want to go through just a quick solution. So for this tips, for some of you, it may be a little bit of because there are 10 of them you have to comply with, right? So within 5.9, we've created a solution that accumulates all the best practices specifically for virtualization, specifically for Hyper-V, and we built the solution from ground up to address this key principles, best practices, and help you address them all with a single solution. So Finding Cloud Security is the unified platform that provides Agentless Virtual Firewall, Agentless Antivirus, and Agentless Intrusion Detection System with anomaly analysis for the Microsoft Cloud platform. So you would find this Agentless protection layers inside, so protection for different kinds of networks, certain level of host protection, multi-tenant access control, multiple antivirus engines that you can choose from, and even a complete isolation of idle virtual machines when you deploy on the system. So that's really important. So when you can cover all the requirements with one single piece of software instead of actually going and trying to combine multiple layers together.
So all of the different tips that you mentioned in the first half of the presentation, those can all be addressed by the 5.9 Cloud Security solution.
Right, so Hyper-V Core still needs to be installed though. I mean, I need to be fair to everyone here. So Windows Server Core, Microsoft Hyper-V Server still have to be there, but everything else, is going to be addressed by Finding Cloud Security. All
okay,
right.
great. And
sure. Okay, so and let's have a quick look. So I noticed we have in a few minutes for today. So I just want to have to give you a very quick intro on how cloud security works, how it integrates with Hyper-V platform. We are going to have a really short demonstration of the product interface, the latest product interface, and then we're going to open up the session for your questions. And I see there are quite a few coming in already. So first part of that is related to the agentless part, so the host-based protection part that 5.9 Cloud Security actually delivers. So it integrates inside the Hyper-V virtual switch, the filtering extension, and it's one of the 3 layers available inside Hyper-V virtual switch. And basically what it does, so if traffic is allowed, so if communication is allowed, it allows it directly on a virtual switch level, and if it's not allowed, it drops it directly over there. So this is a big difference compared to legacy antivirus solutions and legacy networking solutions, right? So when you really have to either do this via endpoint solution or route traffic through a certain device. Also, this approach allows us to leverage full 10 gigabit speed of virtual switch, which is really rare, right? So when you're actually able to apply security on this crazy fast speed available on Hyper-V server, right? So every single virtual switch is 10 gigabit speed, so you are able to apply security rules directly there and actually use full capacity of your network connection over there. So also, because we integrate inside the virtual switch itself, we're able to protect all types of virtual networks. So this includes external networks. So when traffic travels to a virtual machine from somewhere outside, right? So you can see that is being controlled. This also allows you to control internal kind of traffic when hosts talk to virtual machines, and also private network traffic when virtual machines talk to each other. So you have full visibility, full control over this communications, and this is only achievable when you're able to do this directly on a virtual switch level at this stage. So without forwarding traffic anywhere else, on a private network level, you can do this directly on a virtual switch. The performance part is key, as you probably noticed, right? So, my earlier tips, the security protection performance is really something you need to count on when you deploy that inside of virtual machines. So, of course, agentless method is preferred, and this is what we apply to firewall intrusion system and as well antivirus level. So, agent-based scanning can cause antivirus storms and which decrease virtual machines performance. And probably most of you experienced some antivirus scans hits before on your laptops, probably. Just a person definitely did. when it basically prevented me continuing my work. But this is something that we call antivirus storm, right? So when a system is being scanned really heavily in full by antivirus engine. So this is what we address with Final Cloud Security. We use our proprietary change block tracking driver that allows us to scan only changes inside the disk. And because of that, these scans can happen up to 70 times faster, and they happen from a host level, from outside the virtual machine, which definitely saves you a huge chunk of performance. So this is a big performance changer for antivirus protection. So if you ever tried to run full antivirus protection on your systems before, with a legacy endpoint solutions, you probably faced certain antivirus storms and hits. So the way we do the scans and from outside the system, they don't even feel that this is happening. So that's a big change to your antivirus and protection scope. All right. So, and of course, the bit of inbound, outbound, and internal threats is being controlled on the virtual switch level as well. So even if virtual machines are talking to each other, right? So even if there is an attack happening internally, we are still able to see that because 100% of communications are flowing through the virtual switch. So if you have VDI clients, as I have on my slide here, so if you have just standard hosts, doesn't really matter. You need to be able to control these communications and detect attacks happening over there. So also, you are able to use the signatures for that, but anomalous detection is equally important because not all of the traffic patterns get inside the signatures data set right away. So for that specific purpose, we've implemented the anomaly detection layer. So it's the one that allows you to spot unusual traffic, and after creating the baseline and secure the baseline behavior for each of virtual machines, we are able to tell you whether your virtual machine starts behaving differently. So if any of its network performance consumptions and parameters are different to what it usually does. And these deviations are supported as anomalies, and they don't require any signatures at all. They just help you analyze the normal behavior of your system and deviations from that. All right. So, and of course, one last bit here, in terms of the architecture. So, of course, you want your security solution to be highly available, and this is how we build Final Cloud Security. So, if you want to run it in a smaller scope, you probably are going to run it as a single instance. But if you want to expand it to real large-scale environment, you are probably going to use it in a highly available mode. So Final Cloud Security fully supports highly available security architecture, redundant management groups, connection to SQL clusters, SQL always on, and it also allows you to leverage the replication, security rules replication between key sites data centers and your DR sites that you may have, or branch offices that you may have for protection purposes. So that allows you to have very consistent protection scope. So all of your security settings get applied to virtual machines independently from its location. We're using virtual machine identifier to do that. And system itself is highly available, and say, just to give you an example, so even if you say kill connection between host and management services, all hosts remain protected. So that still is the case. Even if you kill our service on the host, still, because we integrate inside a virtual switch, protection still gets applied. So this is something you can't really achieve when you use any external, physical appliances, right? So even virtual appliances at this stage. So that's really robust, highly available architecture that we built for the product, and that you can apply to your systems to protect your virtual machines really well. All right, so, and with that, I would just go and quickly show you what it looks like. So as I know, just you would enjoy seeing the solution live as well as I do. All right, so this screen is going to appear literally a few seconds over here. And Ryan, please give me a hint when everyone can see my screen with Final Cloud Security on.
Sure, yeah. Right now it says demonstration, but okay, now we can see it.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Okay, so when you deploy Fine Cloud Security, right? So you get all these host services working for you, really working hard for you, integrate inside the virtual switch, and allowing you to protect your systems agentlessly via virtual firewall, antivirus protection system, anomaly analysis. So, but this is the management interface, and of course, this is the one you're going to be using most of your time, right? So, the firewall interface would just give you quick overview of what virtual machines have it enabled. So if there are any virtual machines that don't have firewall enabled, remember, and the tip about protecting all the systems, this is where you're going to immediately see that really quickly. So if a virtual machine is not being protected, okay, that's not the best practice, so we need to go and just enable protection for the systems. Also, you would be able to see average traffic profile, what's happening with your virtual machines, how the network is being used. So this is a very quick statistics for you to see whether you comply with your internal needs, right? Protecting your virtual machines. This is HTML5 interface, so you can use any browser to access that, very simply, and allows you to manage your security protection for each virtual machine from a web browser. So for antivirus protection, pretty much the same dashboard, right? So you need to be able to see how many virtual machines are being protected. So what virtual machines are added to the scans, what virtual machines are not. So what virtual machines have virus infections, which ones don't. So signatures updates, top 5 threats, very quickly, one single dashboard, literally 2 seconds for you to understand your current scope, whether you really need to drill down and see your systems that require extra attention, right? Maybe you need to isolate them, maybe you need to clean up viruses. So that's a very quick way of understanding that, right? So of course you can go and review quarantine job, schedule job settings. So everything's going to be available for you. Once you roll out Final Cloud Security, keep in mind you can always also do this in our virtual labs as well. So the virtual labs that are available for you on 59.com. If you go to infrastructure review, so you can see all your virtual machines, security layers enabled for them. So it's very easy to enable security layer for the virtual machine directly in the product interface. If you want to drill down and review current protection and current rules configured for the virtual machine, you get in and see current rules that apply to the system. You can review a filtering log, what kind of security events happen. So you just know network events specifically in this case, right? Review, say, network anomalies, anything that may be deviating from the normal virtual machine's behavior. Check out connections table to see whether virtual machine has actually any malicious connection established, or just review that as a nested command without using that inside the system. So this is something you can do outside of the virtual machine itself. And of course, statistics, just to quickly grasp what virtual machine's traffic profile is at the moment. So, what's the average packet size? What's the blocked statistics, so how many packets actually get blocked. So you can also configure that for statistics table. So this is a very simple, very intuitive management interface. Once again, you can use it from any device in a web browser, so it's very easy to control your current protection state. It supports multi-tenancy, so you can have your own users using that, and you can even limit these users to their resources only. So Final Cloud Security fully supports multi-tenant model, so you can actually allow people to control or review protection state of their own virtual machines should there be a need for that.
And Alex, I noticed that this is a newer looking interface. I know that there are a lot of people in the audience today who may not have seen cloud security in some time. Is this a newer component? Is there still a thick client available?
So this is a newer component. So this is web management interface. We've added that with one of our recent releases of Final Cloud Security. It's available to all of our customers after upgrading to version 10.1 of Final Cloud Security. So if you're currently using Final Cloud Security, to be able to use that, you would update to version 10.1, and then it just becomes a part of the installer for you. You can deploy it on the management server and use it with this nice looking interface.
And it seems like this is pretty convenient for the security administrator that's on the go, that needs kind of that anytime, anywhere access to, their security configurations.
Exactly right. So because sometimes we may be just outside of our office, right? So you may get to RDP session, but sometimes it may be either restricted or it might be harder to do. So just having that available for you via that management interface is definitely great choice. And that's why you've added that inside the product.
See, IT guys have lives too, and so we need to provide them stuff so that they can have a great life and that they can get all their work done that they need to.
Absolutely, absolutely. People like to live personal life, right? So, like you and me. So that's true for
Well,
everyone.
not my life, okay? That's kind of boring, but
All right, so that would conclude the demonstration of the product. So for that, I would like us to switch over to our questions and answers part of the session.
sure. So I'll start reading through a couple of these, and audience members, if you have questions that you'd like to ask, there's a panel in your GoToWebinar control panel that says questions. Go ahead and type the questions here, and we'll try to answer as many as we can in the next 10 minutes. So I'm going to start kind of from the bottom and start moving my way up. All right, so I have one here that says, I'm a service provider. Does this solution apply to me as well?
Yes, absolutely. So, Final Cloud Security supports multi-tenant mode, right? So, this is the one that you can apply to your system right away. So, if you provide services, especially if you provide hosting services, Final Cloud Security is very, very easy to integrate for you. Also, as a product, right, we have an Asia Pack module. So if you are providing services on top of Asia Pack, there is a way to integrate with admin and tenant portal there as well. So this is available for you free of charge, just as an extra component that you can put on top of the existing Final Cloud Security platform. So you can either run it with our very nice looking Web Management Console with the multi-tenant support, or if you say you have Asia Pack already, you can integrate that inside admin and tenant portals to provide security as a service to your customers.
Okay, great. So I have some system requirement questions here, and we might have to get back to this, gentlemen. But what are the minimum OS environment requirements? I'm assuming Azure Cloud on premises is one of them.
So no, as you run this on your private cloud, usually, right? So just Hyper-V is what you would run internally in your data center. So you would dedicate a virtual machine in your management cluster. So if you want to set up a highly available instance of Final Cloud Security Management Service, you would set up obviously 2 virtual machines for that. From the OS requirements, so my recommendation, just know this is something you would also find in the product. So you'll just have like at least 8 gigs of memory for the virtual machine to have, at least 2 virtual CPUs, and depending on where you're planning to keep and how long you're planning to keep firewall logs, you attach something around 200 gigabytes of virtual disk and up. So it all depends on what's your retention policy. By default, we keep them there for 10 days, or if you have something longer that requires that, I would recommend you to go and expand this disk a little bit further, right? But in general, so that's all you need to worry about. So Windows Server 2012, 12.2, 16, it's fine. Any of the systems are going to be supported for Final Cloud Security Management Service. As of Hyper-V host itself, extensibility of virtual switch appeared in Hyper-V Server 2012. So Hyper-V minimum version needs to be 2012 as well.
Okay, and Alex, are you available to stay for just another 5 to 6 minutes after the top of the hour? We can kind of get through a couple more of these questions.
Sure, yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so all you audience members, we'll stay on for an additional few minutes to try to get through as many of these questions as we can. I have another question here. The question as a follow-up to the last question was, what kind of support does Five9 Cloud Security have in a hybrid environment, so Azure and Hyper-V?
All right, so as of Hyper-V in Azure, so that's actually a great question because and a very timely one. So finding cloud security as a solution, right? It's in premises solution first place. I just we support protection for a private cloud, but we know there is very big trend right happening at the moment when certain workloads get into the public cloud, so specifically Azure, and this is what we also want to help our customers to do at the moment. So there is a new solution that's called Five9 Azure Smart Firewall. And this is the one that allows you to configure firewall rules on your Azure subscription version machines as well. So that's possible. So Azure is something we are working on at the moment. So for the support, so the logs can be loaded inside Final Cloud Security itself, for example. So and we are definitely going to be adding even further support and a very transparent support for virtual machine migrating between public and private cloud, right? But at the moment, so you would use Final Cloud Security for on-premises protection and Five9 Azure Smart Firewall. That's part of the package for Azure Virtual Machines protection.
Okay, great, thanks. And then we have a question here. Do you have any ability to log baseline of traffic use? Is there any way to store historical info or to even know if something is happening out of an expected range? That's something that the anomaly detection would handle, correct?
That's correct, right? So this is what we do here. So we create this baseline for each virtual machine. So say there is a separate baseline, for example, for a number of packets coming in, right? So the ones that get allowed and the ones that get blocked. So whether you allow that specific on the firewall or not. So then we would also check the packet size, right? So if you get certain packets on the system and because of its service, right? And then suddenly it gets some jumbo packets and really large ones, or some really different ones to what it usually experiences, right? So this is obviously deviation from the baseline that we are going to spot and notify about. So we split that for loud and block traffic, and this is what statistics shows you, and this is what anomalous detection actually notifies you about.
Okay, and then we have, a more tactical question, and we don't have to get into, any specific costs, but could you explain kind of the license structure a little bit? Is it perpetual? Is it monthly? Is there some sort of combination?
So it depends on what kind of business we're in. So our general subscription is based on it's either annual subscription or 2-3 year subscription. Service provider model licensing is obviously slightly different just because of the nature of the environment. So if you work in service provider space, I would encourage you to reach out to account manager. So, but the common model that we use and apply to the product is annual subscription license that includes all the product upgrades, obviously all the definitions, upgrades, everything, as well as the baseline support for the product. So that's how we license that at this moment.
Okay, great. And I have a question that came in here. We have a Five9 manager with antivirus, and we also have this Five9 cloud security web management. Could you kind of explain the difference between the two?
So the Five9 Cloud Security and Five9 Manager, the older version of Five9 Manager that used to have this module, right? So is is definitely close from antivirus standpoint, right? But it doesn't cover all the security scope. So at this moment, what we are doing, so we are definitely recommend you to stick with cloud security because it allows you to cover this multi-layered security approach tip. And with Five9 Manager, there is also, by the way, there is a great product called Five9 Manager Data Center that we released this year. This is actually a very comprehensive solution that includes monitoring, that includes distributed management, as many hosts as you need and as many locations as you need. It includes role-based access control, so you can actually delegate your users control over certain virtual machines only. And one of the key differentiators of that version is also it includes backup. So finding manager data center includes backup, which is important from the security protections point as well, right? So if you get hit by ransomware, backup is absolutely a must to have, right? So this is what we've incorporated inside Find Manager product.
And that's actually a great segue into two related questions that we received about ransomware. We have, one question that's, what is the best defense against ransomware in this case? And then I also have a question that says, I understand that WannaCry propagates through weaknesses in SMB protocols. Can ransomware travel through a remote client's RDP connection to a VM, like a pseudo SMB disconnection?
So, obviously RDP section can potentially allow you to put a virus in, right, where built-in file transfer methods. So, in general, so, the way WannaCry specifically populated just and replicated itself, so it was looking for older SMB, using systems, right, and using the vulnerability there to copy itself and execute itself, and to encrypt systems. I would say that if you run your Windows updates, and you want to make sure you make sure that your systems get updated. So in that respect, WannaCry is not something that could affect you, right? So part of that whole big story, right, was about people not really updating the systems. So at that time, but what could really prevented that spread internally, right, was say virtual machines isolation. So for example, right, virtual machines that for example, had to use any older types of services could be isolated from any other ones on any other production systems much harder. So, and also intrusion detection, anomaly analysis should have spot that behavior very quickly because that definitely was an abnormal behavior happen inside the system. So having your systems backed up and updated is still extremely important, right? So say if you use for example, web application, it's open outside, it's available for everyone to access on port 80 or port 443. You don't want that application to be vulnerable, right? Because you would still allow that on the firewall. If it's a heavy load one, also it's a little bit harder to tell whether there's abnormal behavior or not. So you would spot attack happening, you would prevent virus launching on this system, but maintaining backup copy and maintaining the update state of that is still extremely important.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alex. And we have time for one more question. And for all those people who are asking about trials and presentations and slide decks, yes, we will send that out either sometime today or tomorrow, but we'll get you that as soon as possible. So with that being said, the last question, we had tip number 2, and this is in regards to tip number 2, and I don't recall what that is, but it says, is tip number 2 valid? Tip number 2 is valid if they are on the same network card and the same network segment. What if the network segments are segmented?
All right, so different kinds of virtual networks, right? So this kind of question. So if you segment your virtual machines, obviously, right? So there is less chance of them being able to talk to each other. Actually, so the way networking works, is actually allows you to protect yourself to an extent here, right? But when you use different segments, that means that this traffic should go through say network device, right, to actually make this segmentation happen. So in that case, right, you're unlikely to be using virtual internal network or private network. So this is slightly disconnected from each other, right? So probably if you use segmenting inside your network and you're probably using external networks only, that's a little bit slightly different kind of networking setup. But even in that case, right, so what happens if for any reason your network configuration gets reset and say this guy's end up sitting up on the same segment? So you still need to be able to control complete traffic flow between the virtual machines. And actually, if they're running on different segments and you finally see a communication happening between these two segments that probably shouldn't be the case, right? That's a huge red flag, right? That's an alarm. So this should not be happening.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, Alex. You've been awesome. Thank you, everybody in the audience. We appreciate you coming. Be sure to check Five9 often for upcoming webinars. Also, be sure to follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Follow us in Spiceworks. We're often active and posting really great, helpful information for you. And as we come out with our new webinar schedule, we're happy to share that with all of you. So thank you so much for attending the webinar, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.